open up here today with just an illustration that has to deal with sports. All right, everyone, so pay close attention. In the world of sports, everyone, there's none quite like the accomplishment that has been made by one particular franchise, one particular team here in America, and that is the Los Angeles Lakers. Okay? Bear with me. The Los Angeles Lakers, if you don't know, is a franchise that plays the sport of basketball, and they've been one of the best, if not the best, franchise in the history of the NBA. With a total of 17 championships, all right? That is the second most in the NBA, and that only changed just last year because another team here in the East Coast, known as Boston Celtics, had won their 18th, right? But they have 17 championships in their history. Not only that, they have an unmatched catalog, a litany of superstars that they have produced throughout the years. So the Lakers are arguably one of, if not the greatest franchise of all time and in all sports. But here's the thing. This is a team, everyone, that operates very differently than the rest of the league and rest of the others, all right? While all the other teams are strategizing on a year-to-year basis on how they can sell more tickets, how they can get more fans, how they can get more people in the seats, how they can develop their young players, how they can, do this and do that and have all these strategies about the upcoming year, the Lakers, on the other hand, they're very different. Because why? Their eyes are set on greater heights. They're all about the record books. They're playing a different game than the rest of the league, right? And therefore, what happened a few years ago is something that I want to bring before you and mention to you as an example of what it is that we're going to discuss here today. You see, in the year 2019 to year 2020, that was a season that is known as the season of COVID-19, if you remember. As the world was hit with this pandemic and as the world had gone through so much chaos, so did this particular organization that is the Los Angeles Lakers. The 2019 and the 2020, if you recall, as the pandemic had hit, there was so much chaos that had gone on that all these games that were supposed to be played that had a rhythm and that had a pattern, that had a schedule, it all went out the door and it was chaos completely, right? As a matter of fact, the playoffs were not played in their respective cities and their arenas, but it was a designated area in Florida where all the teams that were in the playoffs had to come to the city and play in this one particular arena, and they called it the bubble. Okay, just bear with me. I know you're going, what is, some of you who have no interest in sports, you're thinking, what is this? Why is he talking about this? I'm almost done. All right, but nevertheless, due to COVID, some of the best players in the league, right, what happened to them? They're not even sick, but because of the strict rules that they have made, if you come in contact, remember this? When you just went near someone who had COVID, like you had to isolate, you had to, what was the term? Quarantine, right. When you had to quarantine and you couldn't do anything, well, that was the same case for the players. So depending on the team that you're on, some of the best players were put on quarantine and they couldn't play in the playoffs. And therefore, but that's not all. It's not just the players either. Even the coaches got sick. Even the coaches were near anyone with COVID, and then they had to sit out. So they weren't being coached by their coach. They were being coached by like the water boy. That's an exaggeration, okay? So anyways, so it was just this chaotic situation that we found where the sports team and the NBA had found themselves in. And therefore, at the end of the year, when the Los Angeles Lakers ultimately won and raised their trophy as the champions of the year 2019 and 2020, everyone had a problem and they all called for illegitimacy, and they wanted to put an asterisk next to the name of their win. And the debate continues on even today, everyone, whether that win that this team had gone through was a true win at all. So with that said, hoping that you're tracking with me here and not drifting away, I want you to remember what I said about today's sermon and what our title will be. Win the war, lose the victory. What I want you to see here today is that that's exactly what Gideon and the Israelites have gone through. There is an asterisk next to the name Gideon and next to this war that had happened. And this is absolutely important to you and I for us to consider, because you and I are on a very similar false impression. And I want you to catch what I'm about to say now, because this is going to be the main thing in which you and I need to wrestle with here today. Many of us, many Christians, including some of you in this room, probably are thinking, I am on the right track, that I am in a good relationship with God, that God is pleased with me. Next up, heaven. But truth be told, what if, everyone? What if that is a mistake? What if what we're thinking in our relationship with God, the whole time we're over here thinking that I'm good, I'm going to be there, Jesus is going to welcome me in, but in reality there is an asterisk next to our name? What if there is a mistake? What if there is no legitimacy to our relationship with God? And this is something that I want us to wrestle with here today. Because everyone, I skipped a huge chunk of text from last week's sermon to today. I skipped Judges chapter 7, 18 through chapter 8, verse 21. And that's the section in which we hear the story about the war that has taken place with the Israelites and the Midianites. And let me try to just summarize it to you to kind of catch you up on what's going on. So if you recall, last week we ended the story with Gideon and the Israelites pretty pumped up, ready to go, and they had believed, because of what they heard from the camp of the Midians, that they had this dream about a loaf of barley bread that's rolled down the hill and crushed all the tents. They were under this impression that God was truly going to bring them victory. So with that in mind, Gideon went back home and to his soldiers, to the 300 men, and said, what? Listen, God is going to do it. I believe. And he tells about this dream and the interpretation of it. So everyone gets excited. So they grab what? A trumpet. They grab what? A jar with a light inside. And they yell for the Lord and for Gideon. And that's where the story had ended. And if you follow along through that story, what ends up happening is that Gideon prepares a surprise attack against the Midianites. In middle of the night, at Gideon's signal, they blow the trumpet out loud as they surround the Midianites and their camp. And what they do is, after the trumpet is blown, they break the jar, and there's a light inside. The light begins to brighten, and they begin to shout for the Lord and for Gideon. And what that has caused is this complete confusion amongst the Midianites. And this is how the Lord works, right? They don't have any weapons on them, and yet what they did, and through what God has done, is that they have created so much confusion that the Midianites, in fear, in trembling, they begin, I guess they're kind of slumber too, because it's the middle of the night. In their confusion, they begin to attack each other. They begin to kill each other. Talk about friendly fire. And that begins to happen, and the 300 men, the Israelites and Gideon, are up on a hill, and they're looking, and they're watching, observing, and they're going, oh my goodness, it's actually happening. They're killing each other off. And Gideon looks slightly far away, and he notices that some of the leaders of the Midianites are running away. So Gideon grabs few men, and he goes and chases after the leaders of the Midianites, catches up to them, and then begins to destroy, kill the leaders of the Midianites. And afterwards, when all is said and done and they have the victory, Gideon returns home, but it's not just they return home to this a parade where people are throwing flowers at them for what they have done. No, but Gideon comes back and he says, all of you leaders of groups and tribes that decided not to help me, that not to help this war, I want you to come here. And Gideon kills them too. And all of this takes place in Judges 7:18 through 8 through 21. And if you think about what all that has happened, what you can understand is how the Israelites have responded in the very beginning of our text. It begins to all make sense. Because with only 300 men, without a sword, without a shield, without a weapon, 135,000 Midianites are destroyed just as God said that it would. And that's when we read verse 22. Can I bring your attention to that? It says, "Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, 'Rule over us, you and your son, and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of the Midians.'" Now, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Here is this leader that they didn't know they had. They don't know about all that has gone and all that has happened behind the scenes. They don't know about Midian being scared in the beginning where he's hiding in the wine press. They don't know about the questions and the doubts that Gideon had gone through in the beginning. They don't know about any of this stuff that happened in the background. All they see is this man that is powerful, has leadership qualities, and he's doing exactly what they didn't think was possible. And he does the impossible and he returns, and he's over here being the king that the Israelites absolutely need. And therefore, the men of Israel are going, "Come on, Gideon, be a king, rule over us. You're the type of person that we need. We have just spent the last however many years under this oppression by the Midianites. We need you. We need the 300 men. We need you to lead us." And I want to pause here, everyone, and I want to tell you this story that I know I've shared before. Hopefully you have forgotten, so it'll sound fresh to you, right? Because it reminds me of this story that I read about the great Billy Graham. We all know who Billy Graham is, right? And I find it very interesting because it's something that my wife and I just very randomly decided to discuss sometime this week, because we're just thinking about what it would be like to be in such a position as he found himself in. Now, I don't know if you guys know, but Billy Graham, he led crusades about 40 years ago, in perhaps even longer than that, where he was leading thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people every time he would go into a state or into a city. I mean, the largest gathering he brought together was when he went to South Korea, and apparently in one evening or one day, there were 1.1 million people listening to him preach. Can you imagine that? Do me a favor when you get a chance, not right now, after the sermon's done. Google Billy Graham in Korea. The picture is like an AI thing. It's almost unbelievable, the sea of people that are gathered in front of Billy Graham, right? But that's not all. I mean, pretty much every city he would go into, he would fill up every arena, every stadium. I mean, thousands upon thousands. I looked at his website the other day, and they have a record. I don't know where they get these numbers, but I mean, we're talking, this man had reached millions upon millions of people and brought them to Christ. This is an incredible task. Now, I say all of this to tell you this story, because this is a story that I read. His driver, his chauffeur, right? He said his driver one day was taking Billy Graham after an event, one of the crusades, and he was driving Billy Graham home when suddenly Pastor Graham says, "I want you to pull over, stop the car." And not knowing what's going on, he quickly pulls over to the side, and thinking that there is an emergency situation, the driver gets out to lend a hand, to open up the door, to help him out, to figure out what's going on. But by the time the driver gets out, Billy Graham is already outside of his door. But what he notices and what he witnesses is that he sees Billy Graham on his knees crying, and he's yelling out, "Lord, forgive me of my pride." Now, I tell you this story, everyone, because whether you are preaching to an insurmountable amount of people or overcoming the odds of 300 to 135,000 in a war, events like this, it does something to people. It changes you. I mean, how could it not? How could it not, right? It'd be foolish to think otherwise. And here's the thing. I genuinely believe that when Billy Graham prayed this prayer, he was genuine and that he was repenting and that he recognized himself growing in pride. Most likely he realized that his shoulders were kind of widening, his chin was high, and he probably felt this sense of like, yeah, this is what I've done. Look at me, Lord. Look what I'm doing for you. And in that moment, he recognized it. Therefore, he got out and prayed. And it appears and it seems that's exactly what Gideon is doing. Because look at verse 23 of our passage. Right after he had accomplished this victorious thing, the people request that he becomes their king and rules over them. And listen to Gideon's response. Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you. My son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. Wow, what an incredible response. It sounds almost exactly like what Billy Graham would do. It almost sounds like the very model of what we ought to say and what we ought to do when we find ourselves in a position when our pride begins to kick in. But can I tell you something here, everyone? Because there lies a very important lesson in what we just read here. It appears as if Gideon is going, God, it is you who will rule. God, you are the only king. He is Lord. But can I tell you something? Those words are no different than some of the prayers that you and I pray on a day-to-day, on a weekly basis. Prayers like, God, I will commit myself to you now and forever. How many times have we prayed that prayer in our lives? Or prayers like, God, I am forever grateful for what you have done. How many times do we pray that prayer? It all sounds right, doesn't it? Because it sounds right that Gideon says, I won't rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And we see what's beneath this facade in the following verses. Look at verse 24 through 27. Pay close attention, everyone. And Gideon said to them, this is right after he says, Lord is going to rule over you. And then Gideon says to them, let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil. For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, we will willingly give them. And they spread a cloak, and every man threw in the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were around the necks of their camels. And Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in its city, in Ophrah. And all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. Everyone pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you. What we just read is a man with a corrupted heart. Think carefully what's happening here. Gideon rejects the request to become their king. Why? And if so, why does he suddenly ask and request for them to bring these gold earrings? What is the purpose of gathering their gold if he is choosing not to be their king? Listen carefully. In the mind of Gideon, he's already a king. Come on, he is already a king in his mind. Gideon has realized, and I'm speculating here, everyone. I'm speculating here. But he's thinking to himself, why should I take on the responsibility of a king? All the stress, all the responsibilities, everything that comes with it, when I can just ask for whatever I want and still get it. Everyone, I did the math. When Gideon requests for gold, it says that what was brought to him was 1,700 shekels. That's about 42 to 43 pounds of gold. And in the exchange rate today from gold to dollars, do you know how much that is? $1.4 million. That's pretty good. And there it is, everyone. Gideon is presenting unto us the very nature of humanity. A nature that says, God, I don't need you anymore. I have everything I need. I don't need to be a king. Let God rule over you. All I need to do is ask for gold, and they bring it to me. I've done what I needed to do. I have accomplished something that no one could have accomplished. I did it. For the Lord and for Gideon. Church, do you see the downfall of Gideon? And this is a representation, everyone, of how we live our lives. Over the last 7 years that I've been here preaching out of this pulpit, there's this one particular sin that I always mention, but we're going to add this on here. One of the biggest sin of our lives, everyone, is this understanding that we don't need God. It is one of the greatest sin of our lives. The moment we get to a place in our lives where we feel like, well, I have it made. I have a wonderful family. I have people around me that love me. I have the money. I have the resources. I have the networking. I have it all. I don't need God. That right there, everyone, is a dangerous place to find ourselves in. Amen. And you know what the second greatest sin is that I always mention? The sin of forgetfulness. We forget what God has done for us. We forget what He means to us. And that's why it leads to the very first sin. There's no need for God. That's what we begin to think, and that's what we begin to believe. And church, this is a problem that you and I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But I want you to understand, it is part of our humanity. This is who we are. This is the nature of us. Trust me, if I had $1.4 million, you may not see me on every Sunday. It's true. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I need a break too. It's my 7th year. I need a sabbatical, right? Give me a month off, will you? Let me take some time off. Let me go to Hawaii myself or wherever. You know, my wife and the kids can stay here. I'll just go, and we'll save some money, right? Just kidding. Relax, everyone. I'll take them too, right? But what I'm saying is that if I had 1.4 mil, I'll be doing the same thing. But do you see how easy it is that we fall into this trap? Even though I stand here and say, I don't blame you, that's what I say. But I wonder what God is saying to us. Because we talked about last week about the irony in which we live in. Here we are making excuses and we justify it, but I wonder if God thinks the same way. I think not. So check your humanity, check your heart, check your mind, check your attitude. Where are we with this? Because everyone, that's not the end of Gideon's story. Because he does something and it gets worse. It is said that Gideon then makes an ephod. Now, I don't know if you guys know if that rings any bell for you, but can I just explain? An ephod is a garment that's worn by the priest back in the Mosaic days, right? It's this garment. It's sort of like the overalls that we that some of us, I don't know if anybody wears. I actually mentioned to the worship team we should have a uniform, and that we should all wear overalls. They rejected it immediately. But it's sort of like overalls, ephod that in which the priest would wear. And on this ephod, they would have this breastplate on their chest that includes the 12 precious stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And it is said that when, if you guys don't know, when a priest would wear this garment, this ephod and the breastplate with the 12 precious stones, and he walks into the tabernacle, into the presence of God, it would illuminate the precious stones into this bright light, right? And then the translation for this light in Hebrew language, it's called kabod. Okay, kabod. And this means magnificent splendor, divine light, and glory. And therefore, when the priest would go in and the presence of God would kabod light all the precious stones, when they would come out, it would be blinding for the people that would see. And that's how the people would know God met him there. And it's called a kabod glory, right? And that's what this ephod symbolizes of carrying. It carries the presence of God. And there comes Gideon creating this ephod that symbolizes the presence and the kabod glory of God. And he makes it, puts it in the middle of the city for what people to do? To whore after it. The downfall, talk about tragedy. Gideon goes from the highest place that he can find himself in faith and falls so dramatically and so quickly. And all it took was a win in a war. Literally, do you guys know what it means? You know, the Bible is very specific when it comes to its language and what it's saying. And when it says that the Israelites whored after it, it indicates this work of prostitution. It's likely that there were some sort of act of perversion, cheating against God, and making it, the garment, the ephod, a priority above all else. You know what I'm seeing? What I'm seeing is a repetition of what we saw in Judges chapter 6. Gideon had this altar that was set up for God, that is Baal and Asherah. God tells him, tear it down, as if God knew what was to come and was trying to teach Gideon a lesson early on. Gideon follows suit in the beginning because he's all happy with God. My life is good. I'm with God, remember? And he tears this down and he erects the altar for the Lord. And just as soon as he wins this war and in this battle, he brings in what symbolizes the presence of God as the very symbol or the very item in which the entire people of God whores after as an idol. Imagine what is going on here. Imagine, everyone. And this seems so severe and outlandish, but everyone, do we not realize that's what we do? Can we be honest here this afternoon? Do we not use the symbols of God and truly corrupt it? Think about it. Some of us, we play church, don't we? Not everyone here. Some of us as in out there. No PIF members play church, right? But people do. People do. We see it in our society so blatantly. I mean, I was watching this music awards or something of that nature. I mean, these performances, they have upside down crosses all over. What was it, the Paris Olympics? Remember that opening thing that they did? I know there's arguments and debates about whether that was the case, but it appeared to be the parody of the Last Supper. Right? We take what is pure and holy, that is God, and we turn it upside down, and we corrupt it, and we allow people to whore after it. We bring perversion. And this is what's happening in the world constantly. But here's the thing. If you remember in Judges chapter 6, after Gideon tears down this the altar of Baal and Asherah, do you remember who came to his defense? Gideon's dad. Gideon's dad comes to Gideon's defense. And what does the dad say? Hey, if Baal is truly a God that you think is real, then let Baal contend for himself. Meaning, let Baal defend himself if it's truly a God, right? Well, here it is. Here's the moment where God is being made fun of, when there's a mockery of God. So then how does our God contend with this situation? Let's look at what happens in Judges chapter 8, verse 28, in our very last verse. It says, so Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more, and the land had rest. 40 years in the days of Gideon. Gideon lives like a king. The Israelites whores after the ephod. And what does God do? How does he contend? How does he defend? He gives rest to the Israelites for the next 40 years. How does that work? That's because God's promises are unabated, unchanging, unaltered. The way God defends himself is, I will not respond to you. I made a promise, I keep it, and I stick to it. For 40 years, God lets them be. That's the God we worship here today. Come on, do we understand that? Gideon made an astronomical mistake here. He had failed miserably here today. But God doesn't react to it. He doesn't go, how dare you, Gideon, after all that I've done? I've made you into something. I've answered all your questions. I led you through. I allowed you to overcome the greatest odds that anyone can think of. I took you and 300, no one, and I allowed you to overcome 135,000 soldiers. How could you do this to me? That is not what God does. But God looks, perhaps with the eyes of sorrow, pain, pity, perhaps. I don't know. But what he does do is that he remains in his state of promise. I made a promise to you. I'm going to keep it, and 40 years of rest shall continue. That's how God responds to you and I. So where does your blessing come from? It doesn't come from all the goods that you have done. Where does the favor come from? It doesn't come from our accomplishments. It comes from the promise that God has made in our lives. And that's why he is worth our worship. And that is why he is deserving of our praise. That is why you and I are here today. We're not here to rub our hands together and hoping that God will forgive us, wishing that our lives will turn around all of a sudden. We're here because the promise is already set in stone. And that God's blessing will maintain and will remain in your life. But that also is an opportunity in and of itself for you to turn around, transform, and change today. What we have going for us, you and I, everyone, are not the wins and the losses like Gideon was thinking. You see, it is true that Gideon won the war, but lost the victory. And like so, you and I will have our wins and we'll have our losses in life. We will have seasons of being on the right track and seasons of going astray. We will be right with God and we'll be wrong with God in different seasons. But it still won't change what God had promised. So therefore, it is suffice to say, he loves you no matter what. He is faithful to you even if you and I are struggling with idols in our lives. He forgives you no matter the sin, and he is holy even when you and I are far from him. It doesn't change him. He is immutable. We do not change him. He remains, and that's why he is worthy of our worship and praise. And that's why we say that he is holy forever. So church, it is my request and my encouragement to you that you and I, we live a life that reflects the design of our almighty Creator. That we make every effort in our lives to please him because he deserves it. Not because we gain something or we benefit anything from him. Can we grow up and mature? And finally move on from this phase of childlikeness and get to a place where we say, God, all right, I'm here for you. What can I do? It is time to get to that phase. It is time that we grow. It is time that we follow the design in which he created for us to follow suit. And you know what that is? And that is to love Him and to love others and to love ourselves. That's what it's all about. So can we do that, church? Can we declare that God is forever good? Amen. Can we declare that God is forever holy? Amen. Can we declare that God is forever, always, His promises remain and it stays true?